Yo, and welcome to the 65th episode of Lake of Rage, a Pokemon trading card game podcast. I'm your host, as always, Kevin Clementi, aka Mellow_Magikarp. I'm joined today by two very special temporary guest hosts. Joining us for the first time in about a year, but the second time overall, we have Nate Kaplan, fresh off a 37th place finish in NAIC.
Hey everyone, what's up?
And joining us for the first time, fresh off a top 8 finish at NAIC, we have Noah Yoshida.
Hey guys, thanks for having me, Kevin. Excited to chat.
Thanks for being here. We have a very special episode for y'all today. This is the Palkia episode. This is the deepest of dives that we can possibly give you. Both of these players played Palkia this past weekend, and a fairly interesting list at that. So we're going to, first off, learn a little bit about who Noah is. Then we're going to talk about the deck selection and, most importantly, some of those tech choices. Because when you look at the lists in top 8, they all look the same with one exception, and that is Noah's list. And if you go look at the list right now, you will see there are some things in there. You don't know why they're there. I don't know why they're there either. We're going to learn together. And we're going to talk about both of their runs because they both did incredibly well and played some very interesting matchups. We'll get into that as well. But first off, Noah, I'm going to be honest, I have never heard your name before, your NAIC run. Can you kind of introduce yourself? You know, when did you start playing? What are some of your accomplishments? Where did this top 8 come from?
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. That's pretty much what I expect. I think there were about 3 people in all of NAIC who knew me before this year. So, and they were all people that I pretty much played with in Kansas. So I started playing in 2008 in juniors. I was not particularly good in juniors, but got into the game, aged up into seniors where had a pretty good run. My last 3 years in seniors, I qualified for Worlds all 3 years, attended Worlds twice. And my final year in 2013, I managed to make top 8 at Nationals and top 16 at Worlds. Then after that, I started playing a little less, was more busy in high school, pretty much tapered off by about like 2015, and then went to college, didn't have Pokemon around, so pretty much quit cold turkey for about 5 years, and then of course COVID hit, but as tournaments were coming back, I said, hey, Pokemon was a really fun part of my life for 6 or 7 years. Kind of want to get back into it, so yeah, I went to some locals, met Nate in February. Went to Salt Lake City Regionals with him, went to a 1K as well, and then showed up to Milwaukee and NAIC. So yeah, that was my 3rd tournament in about 8 years.
Jeez, well, welcome back to the game. What a way to show that you still got it.
Yeah, it was. It's great seeing everyone that I used to know, and yeah, the community is very welcoming. So it's been great.
And for anyone wondering, if you're a new listener and you haven't listened, go back and listen to the episode where we had Nate on the first time and his run with Baby Blounds in the previous NAIC into a top 4 finish to learn more about him. And also, here are some predictions that turn out to be incredibly correct because this man sees the game in a way that a lot of us don't. Speaking of seeing the game in a way a lot of us don't, you both played Palkia. Now, we're going to run into, how did you come up with Palkia? And most importantly, how did you come up with this list? But before we do that, I want to point out some things for anyone who, people are in their car, they're not sitting behind a computer. They may not have seen the list. Because let's be honest, we all do the same thing. I'm going to go play Palkia, click on the latest Limitless tournament, click on the highest placing list, copy, import to PTCGO. And they're just going to assume, all right, this is the same list as Bradner. It is not. Some of the highlights. There's a quick shooting Inteleon in here. There are 2 capture energies in here. We have the usual, there's 4 Rita and cross switchers and stuff like that. And we also have the rare candy in here as well. So some cards that, it's not even like, oh, these are interesting cards. These are cards that no one has talked about, or at least no one I've heard of has talked about. So you kind of run us through, how did you come to want to play Palkia? And then how did you come up with this very different list?
Yeah, Nate, maybe I'll let you take this one.
Yeah, for sure. I can talk a little bit, and then Noah, you might want to give a little bit more backstory for how we came up with maybe some of the specific tech cards. So I will give some credit here. I think initially initially the one that got Noah into Palkia at least was Grant Manley, who we were staying with. We were sort of bouncing various deck ideas off of each other. And you know me, I played Baby Browns in 2019. I avoid meta decks like the plague. So of course I wasn't on Palkia at all. I was testing Arceus Duraludon of all decks. Not quite off meta, but definitely a little bit. Definitely not quite as complex as Palkia is. And that's what I played for Milwaukee and did terribly. But Noah had a solid finish at Milwaukee, and I started looking into Palkia. I'm like, maybe this is one of those formats where it's really not correct to go off meta. It's more correct to go on meta and play what is widely considered the best deck. And started testing Noah's list. Noah was grinding the deck really hard, making a lot of changes to it, and ended up just landing on it because I think primarily the biggest tick off for me as far as a meta choice goes was the counter Spelkia, which is always, I think, one of the reasons why this is not a great reason for not playing a meta deck, but oftentimes I avoid them because I hate that everyone's countering them. I don't want to be the person who walks into the tournament that everyone's trying to beat, but there's like not really a lot of great cards that beat Palkia right now. If you look at all the lightning type attackers in the game, the best one is Flying Pikachu VMAX, which, don't get me wrong, decent card, won NAIC, but like definitely has a lot of flaws. And then you look at a tier below that, it's stuff like Zero Oro, which is just, it doesn't do anything against Tool Jammer, just has a lot of issues with it. So I think following that logic, I landed on Palkia as what I thought was the best play for NAIC. And then the night before, Noah reads some stuff about Palkia and comes up with a few of these interesting texts that we added to the list, as well as just generally improving overall consistency, like Capture Energy. I think I'll let him talk about that one, but and I think that for me really sold it, like a really consistent version of the best list, and we had a really solid idea of how to beat Mirror, and I think all those factors just combined to be like, this is definitely the play. But I think I want to let Noah talk about some of maybe those interesting texts and how he came across the final list, because it changed like 6 or 7 cards literally like 12 hours before the event. So
wait, I guess when you say the night, you literally mean the night before, Thursday night before NAIC's yes. Friday night.
Yeah. I was getting in bed, and me and Nate were sharing the same room, and I'm like, "Hey Nate, by the way, I changed 6 cards in the list." And he said,
"Hey like,
Noah, have you?" Yeah. You're like, "Have you tested it?" I said, "No, I haven't tested it, but it's just better. You just look at it, and it's better." And he's like, "Okay, that's cool." Yeah, so thank you for trusting me on that.
That is a lot of faith. I don't have trust in people changing a single card without testing it. So trusting 6 cards is like ridiculous.
Yeah, and normally I will say I wouldn't. Normally I've stayed with a lot of people at events, and every single time, 50+% of the group is panicking the night before, not knowing what to play, myself included. And I always say the number one advice I give is the night before, you're not going to come up with, some people can, but very rarely, you're not going to come up with something brand new, something insane, something that's going to break the meta. It's just not going to happen. The night before, you're not testing anymore. Play what you're comfortable with. And that also means the list that you're comfortable with. Don't change 10 cards in your list because someone messaged you the night before and they're like, I have this 10-card spicy deck that beats the spicy tech that beats this one matchup. They're like, don't do that. Play what you're comfortable with. That being said, I looked at the changes and they all made a lot of sense. And Noah gave me reasons as to why each one was good in the deck. And I was also feeling like our deck, the previous version, was a little inconsistent. So sometimes it's okay, especially when you're adding consistency, which is mostly what we did, but normally do not advise.
That's good advice.
Definitely recommend that as well. So yeah, I guess I was playing Palkia ever since pretty much Grant just handed me his list for Milwaukee. I said, all right, cool, I'm going to run with this. Ended up making top 64. While I was playing it, I think Milwaukee was like a good testing ground to kind of figure out what Palkia was good at, what it was bad at, and what, like how I could improve this base list that I started with. So I definitely, at Milwaukee, my losses were all to a Mirror Match, Blissey, and Flying Pikachu. And during all those matchups, I kind of realized, hey, like this list is really consistent, but it lacks kind of in-game finishers or like kind of spicy power cards. I wasn't playing Quick Shooting, I wasn't playing Echoing Horn. So yeah, it definitely felt like the deck would kind of struggle at the very end. So yeah, going into the week before NAIC, I was testing out a lot of stuff. I put in quick shooting, I put in echoing horn, I was trying tool scrapper, I was thinking about Leon, and Nate can kind of say this. We were testing the list the night before, and it definitely felt a little inconsistent. And I think that's kind of like why he trusted me with the changes, because I essentially took out all the spicy techs, added pure consistency, and said,
Not quite all of them. A portion of them. Yeah.
I was going to say
Yeah.
this might be the spiciest list in top 8, so I'm not sure. Okay, correction, except Sanders, right? But like otherwise, the spiciest list in top 8.
Yeah. Yeah. So I essentially, so I guess like to give more backstory. So I'm half Japanese and I'm fairly fluent in like reading and speaking Japanese. So, whenever I do like prep, or at least this year, I've been like reading a lot of Japanese Twitter because they're kind of like a month or two ahead of us with the meta. And everyone was referencing this like mythical article by Team Torchic that supposedly just destroyed the meta there, just like entirely broke it. It changed how everyone was playing Palkia. All the Palkia lists got like super optimized. And I was like, okay, like what are these people talking about? And, I was like, hey, like, I could probably just like figure out a good list with like a week of testing. But of course, night before the event, me and Nate were kind of like, this list is feeling a little inconsistent. Definitely don't think we should just go back to what I was playing in Milwaukee. So I had previously messaged a friend from college who lives in Japan. I said, hey, do you think you could buy this article for me and send me a PDF of it? And thankfully, she woke up at like 6 a.m. and saw it because it was like kind of late at night in Columbus. So she sent it to me, and I ended up reading the whole thing. And they had a lot of interesting details about like, specific matchups, specific techs. Definitely encourage anyone who can to go read it. It is $10. I think it's a very worth $10. Maybe we can like put a link in the YouTube description or something.
For sure. If you give it to me, I'll have it in the.
Yeah, it was very informative, and informed pretty much all of the last minute changes that we did.
That's awesome. So it sounds like you just kind of trusted that someone else's testing was that good because of these extra like inroads that you have that the rest of us don't have. That's using your resources. I love that.
Yeah, and I guess also kind of like the logic behind the changes made a lot of sense because I had been playing the list for like, been playing Palkia for about like a week nonstop, essentially. So everything that they said made sense. Of course, if it didn't, I think, I'd be a little more hesitant to, randomly take strangers' advice on the internet. But, everything checked out. And I'm like, okay, this all makes sense. I'll just go with it.
So far you've been incredibly vague. So I got to ask, what are some of these changes that made a lot of sense? And as much as you're willing to dispose, because like obviously the author should get their money's worth, or they should get paid for their work, right? But like everything that you're willing to be like, this makes sense, or I think this is something that people would figure out, or anything like that.
Yeah. So I guess like just to get started, it's something that I definitely totally forgot about over the like 7 years I didn't play, but it's just like basic deck building stuff. So if your main attacker, aka Palkia, if you only have like 7 or 8 outs to it turn 1, you're not going to be getting Palkia down as often as you'd like. And that was one of the main issues with like the version of the deck I was playing the week before NAIC was I'd cut a Palkia for like a heavy ball. I was playing Starmie. I think I might have cut a quick ball as well. So in the end, when I kind of laid the deck out, going first, I only had like 8 outs to Palkia, which was not great. Because if you don't get Palkia out, sometimes you just lose. So up that consistency a bit with, by taking out the Starmie, taking out the heavy ball, adding like Palkia back in. And then one of the interesting cards that we added for this was the Capture Energy. So the idea behind Capture Energy is instead of VIP Pass, Capture Energy serves as kind of like another way to find basics turn 1, as well as being an energy acceleration to, a Sobble or a Greninja that you'll attack with later on in the game. And then, of course, it's not a dead card when you see it late game because you can concealed cards it away.
Yeah, that was one of the things that when watching the finals match, Isaiah had the 4 Battle VIP pass. And, I'm talking with chat because I'm co-streaming because I'm not at NAIC, right? It's like, this just feels so bad because he didn't have a Battle VIP pass in that game. It's like he has 4 dead cards in the deck. Azul plays 4 Marnies and a Roxanne. Like, it's going to come back to bite him. And at one point in the game, Azul Marnies him into like a Battle VIP pass and he like top decks another, something like that. And it's just like, this just feels so bad when it doesn't come out turn 1. So I love that logic of capture energy, half a battle VIP pass, right? Cost your attachment for turn, but you can Greninja it away, which seems incredibly powerful.
Yeah, I want to really emphasize that last point. I think it's. I think we all know at this point that Greninja is a very good card, but I don't know if it's quite intuitive why why just drawing 2 cards is so good. I think in Palkia specifically, because you're an Inteleon deck, Inteleon decks tend to not draw very many cards. You have a lot of power. You have a lot of search power, and you can search out those power cards. And we'll probably get into this a little bit more when we discuss like matchups. But you can have these huge explosive combos. They often require a lot of cards to do, and even like just 2 extra things is so important because a deck that does not draw very many cards, an extra 2 cards is immensely helpful and helps you build. I mean, you hit like 1 more combo piece and that can win you the game. 1 more cross switcher, something along those lines. So the 2 cards in a lot of decks might not seem that impactful, but in Inteleon specifically, it's really important.
Yeah, anyone who's played enough Inteleon should know that if you're playing Inteleon properly and you're doing your combos every turn, you're eventually going to have a small hand. Like Inteleon has this thing of like, oh, you have like an 8-card hand, but that's only if you're like building. If you're actually actively doing stuff like Palkia, I don't know, is it wrong to say Palkia is the most aggressive deck in the format outside of Mew VMAX?
It can
I think, yeah,
Okay.
it can be, which is I think what makes it really strong. It can also be quite a good mid-range deck, and a deck that kind of comes back from very bad starts. Yeah, I do think maybe like Turbo Palkia or something like that will probably take the throne for most aggressive deck. But the fact that Inteleon Palkia can almost do the exact same thing that Turbo Palkia does is I think what makes it quite strong.
Okay, do the same thing with just so many other attacking options and so many other. Yeah, no, I agree. Turbo Palkia fell off, and I think that was to no one's surprise who has actually played the Inteleon version. So that explains the 2 captures, right? I guess the rare candy. Cards gotta suck, right?
Yeah. So I guess there's like two reasons for rare candy. I'll go into the first one. Maybe I'll let Nick take the second one. So like the first reason, and I kind of alluded to this earlier. Palkia is the deck that if you don't get Palkia's down turn 1, you're probably going to lose. If you're playing against a Mew, they're just going to chase all your Palkia Vs down. If you're against Mirror, they're going to chase all your Palkia Vs down. So it really, like, you're in a tough spot if you don't find Palkias, but you're bound to not find Palkias in a decent chunk of your games, right? So what do you do? Or what do you do if you only find 1 Palkia and you go second, and then they boss KO the Palkia V? So you need some way to get back in the game, and that is pretty much what rare candy serves, or one of the purposes of rare candy. So the idea is you're going second. You attach energy to Sobble. You're only able to get 1 Palkia V out. They boss kill Palkia V, and then the next turn you Irida for Candy and Teleon. Attach energy, rare Candy and Teleon. You get 2 searches back, so you can usually find like 1 or 2 more Palkia Vs, and then you're hitting with Aqua Bullet for 120, setting up a one-shot with Palkia on the next turn for whatever you hit, and then possibly setting up for another 1-hit KO with the 20 damage from Aqua Bullet on the bench.
Is that strategy one of the reasons why you have a 4-3 Palkia line instead of a 3-3 Palkia line like most other decks seem to be running?
I think 3-3, if you play 3-3 Palkia, you would need a heavy ball because you might just lose games if you prize one of them. And if you're playing 3 Palkia as well, that's like -1 out to Palkia turn 1. So in the end, we just like weren't able to keep like the number of outs to a turn 1 Palkia high enough, while also kind of like playing heavy ball. So yeah, that's kind of why we're playing 4-3.
That makes a lot of sense. And then what's the second
Yeah,
reason for the candy?
Yeah, definitely. I think So I'll emphasize how strong. Like, I mean, it is the norm. A lot of times in this format, your 1V gets knocked out. Like, it feels like you're completely out of the game. The ability to come back into the game, and not just come back in really strongly. I mean, Aqua Bullet is a lot of damage. Like 120 will set up pretty cleanly for it to a KO on basically anything, and the 20 damage can often be really important later too. Along with getting 2 searches, which is just outrageous. Yeah, I mean, it feels strong enough on its own, being able to just do Aqua Bullet on turn 2. But the fact that you get to then search your deck for 2 cards, you can set up your Palkias. If you already have outs to Palkias in your hand, you can get something else. Just the whole combo is very strong. I won a lot of games off the back of that. And I think one of the reasons I like it so much is because you could, if you want to think of Candy like a tech card, I'll explain why it's not really. I think it's just generally useful. But if you think of Candy like a tech card, it's helpful in the situations where you're losing, which I think is important. You don't want cards that are helpful in the situations where you're winning because you're going to win anyway. But the cards that help you in the bad situations are particularly strong because they'll bring those win rates up in games you wouldn't have otherwise won.
I feel like
But
that little quote there is one that people really need to sit and digest for a second because it's that idea of, you've heard win more cards before. The cards that help you when you're winning don't matter because you're already winning. That's just such good advice, and something I think everyone who's a bad deck builder, myself included, should kind of absorb that a little bit real quick. But anyway, okay, keep going.
But I think that's generally an important thing to think about with deck building. But then I also, I mean, I'm saying it's a tech card, but really it's, I think I was surprised because originally when I tested Candy, not knowing about this like turn 2 Aqua strategy, I didn't find myself using it that often. But as I tested more and just kind of knew about its existence in my deck, and knew of it as an option, I just found it really useful in a lot of different situations. It's really like, as an Inteleon deck, you pretty commonly just have a Sobble on your board, generally over the course of the game. And the ability, I mean, if you just draw Rare Candy, if it's just sitting in your hand, it's usually not a bad sight. It's almost very rarely a dead card. The ability to use it use it in combination with an evolution incense instead of grabbing a Drizzile to grab 2 cards instead of 1 is often really important. I mean, a lot of the situations with Palkia that you get into is you'll miss your big explosive combo by 1 card, and 1 additional card. I mean, every single card that you can get out of the deck is really important. So it was I almost always enjoyed having it, which I think just makes the card really strong. And then also you could Rare Candy out quick shooting, which was both useful because sometimes you needed a quick shooting earlier in the game than you would otherwise be able to get it. And also with closed deck lists, some kind of surprising, players who would think, multiple turns in advance would look at your board. They're like, you can't get a quick shooting, no Drizziles in play. And they would completely miscalculate and you would have a quick shooting the following turn. Particularly useful against Blissey, I think would be a really good, specific example of that, because Blissey, it's all about calculating the damage they're doing, the healing they can do, and if they're off by 20 damage, it can cost them a game. So a little bit of a more niche use. I don't like putting cards in decks that are just like, oh, my opponent won't know I have it. But I think in this particular case, especially at a large tournament and Rare Candy not being popular, I found a lot of value out of that situation.
I think to go off of that one, as the non-Palkia player, I played less than 5 games of Palkia, and that was all to help a junior test for the event. I've played against it. I am always calculating, and I'm always like, okay, keeping a small bench, etc. I would have fallen for quick shooting 10 times out of 10. I'm never playing around it. I'm going to be 20 damage shy because I know that I can do this, right? I'm playing around Echoing Horn or whatever, or I'm 20 damage shy with the Echoing Horn. So being able to candy out the quick shooting is don't knock that. Don't knock that at all in a closed deck list environment. So there was also, actually, you got the quick shooting, I guess. Is there other reasons the quick shooting is good? Like, where else does that math, how often does that math come up?
I'm going to let Noah take this because he played against the mirror 8 times. So I think he'll explain the kind of the key situation in which it's useful.
Yeah. So I think my main mistake at Milwaukee was not playing quick shooting. And I think quick shooting is one of the most vital pieces in the deck, mainly because against Palkia, right, you're trying to limit your bench, and a lot of decks aren't able to effectively do that, so they're kind of nerfing themselves by saying, okay, I'm not going to use Crobat, I'm not going to put down another Bibarel, I'm not getting another Arceus out, and by threatening the quick shooting, you're limiting their bench by 1 more slot, which is very nice. And if they don't, you're just going to use quick shooting, take a KO when you shouldn't have, and win the game. So yeah, quick shooting is very good in that situation. But also, so one thing that comes up in the mirror match a lot is playing around Roxanne. Mm-hmm. And the reason behind this is, I think, we mentioned this earlier, at least with this specific build of Palkia. So we have only 2 draw supporters, we have 2 Melanies, and we have Greninja. So that's the only way we're ever accumulating cards in our hand. And of course, we do have some card advantage with Irida and Shady Dealings and Teleon, but it's not a whole lot. And going down to 2 cards can be really a bad time, as a Palkia player.
Can I interrupt real quick? The
Yep.
concept of card advantage is one that I think is pretty advanced. So can you give a quick, like, what does card advantage mean?
Sure. So I guess so I might be like misusing the term, but like the way I think about it is I have an Irida in my hand and it's one card, and I'm using that one card, so I'm like going down a card in my hand. But in return, Irida is getting me two cards from my deck. So in that sense, it's almost like I'm netting one card from my hand with Irida. And same with the Shady Dealings and Teleon. Since I'm playing it, I'm using one, but I'm getting two cards back, so I'm gaining one. And you'll notice those are like the only situations where we're really gaining cards besides drawing them with concealed cards and Melanie. You know, a Drizzile, for example, will just kind of replace itself with another card in your hand. So, and in a deck, you know, like Palkia, where you're not drawing a lot of cards, it's very important to, you know, maximize every single card in your hand. Because, you know, a deck that plays Crobat, plays Research, plays Babarrel, you're going to be churning through, you know, a third of your deck every turn sometimes. But with Palkia, you know, you don't have that kind of luxury. So, yeah, keeping, you know, making sure that you're able to kind of maximize the cards that you have is very important.
I will say I think that's a very valid use of the terminology for listeners who play other card games. Card advantage for other games is often used as a term of like in Magic the Gathering and Hearthstone, maybe a little bit less so these days, but it's you draw so few cards over the course of a game. The idea that you're using fewer cards than your opponent is to like you're using fewer cards to deal with your opponents. Like I use one card to deal with two of my opponent's cards. That's how a lot of people use card advantage. That concept does not really exist in Pokemon, so because there's just so much draw. But in a deck like Palkia where you don't have a lot of draw, it's much more important to think about.
That makes sense. All right. Anyway, go back to the Roxanne stuff. I know I interrupted you on a good run.
Yeah. So for Roxanne, I think it's less impactful. Well, it's specifically less impactful against Palkia decks that run high counts of Research and still run cross switchers. Because against if they get Roxanne, they can always just, you know, find an out to a Research, draw 7, and then maybe get the cross switchers usually for game at that point if, you know, you're Roxanning them. But most Palkias these days are running high Irida counts. So when they have two cards to work with in their hand, usually they can at best, you know, get an Irida or maybe get a Shady Dealings and Teleon and then get two more cards to work with. So you're really, you know, Palkia only has about like 3 or 4 cards to work with after a Roxanne. And I found pretty much every time I was playing the deck, I was always trying to avoid getting Roxanned until like the last possible moment, or trying to bait out a Roxanne after I had established a really good board position. So I could play with pretty much 0 cards in my hand for like 1 or 2 turns. And in that sense, quick shooting is really helpful. Going back all the way to quick shooting, I think that's what we started talking about. Because, you know, quick shooting is able to just sit there and ensure that, you know, within 1 or 2 turns, I'll be able to get a 1-hit KO on something. So if I'm not able to do it on the active, I can soften up their second attacker on the bench over a few turns. And, you know, I don't need any kind of fancy cross switchers or belts or echoing horn. As long as I have some Palkias out, I'm usually able to take a one shot. So it's helpful in that sense. And then against the mirror specifically, what you can do is oftentimes, you know, getting the first 2 prizes is fairly easy. But then, you know, you're in a situation where, okay, I can take another 2 prizes this turn, but then I'm just going to get Roxanne. They're going to KO my Palkia. I'm going to have 1 left, but only 2 cards in hand. And then most likely they can just like boss kill something or echoing horn or set up a very good 1-hit KO on my active. So how do I avoid that? And the answer that I kind of came up with, and I think maybe they talk about it in the article too, is you soften up the active Palkia with like, you know, 250 to 260 damage. And then the next turn you finish it off with quick shooting. And then what you can actually do if you play Echoing Horn is you Echoing Horn the Palkia you just knocked out back to the bench. And since they had a full bench, you just boss KO that and take 4 prizes in a single turn, completely avoiding Roxanne. And that's actually how I beat Gustavo Wada in my day 2 match against him. Was game 2. I was able to pull that off, and he just kind of threw his hands in the air. It's like there's no playing around that really. Like unless they're playing Marnie, you know, they can't disrupt you, so you can pretty much checkmate the mirror match as early as like turn 3.
Wait, that's disgusting. Like, oh my goodness. Did you just like, I feel like everyone listening to this is just like, oh my gosh, I'm looking at the mirror match in an entirely different way now after hearing that line of play. That's so
Yeah, and
good.
then of course, if they're going really aggressive against me, I just throw down Roxanne, and oftentimes they just have to take very suboptimal lines where they're just two-shotting a Palkia in the active, or they're not able to establish a quick shooting after I Roxanne them. So then once again they're taking two-hit KOs in the active. I will say that that line is slightly susceptible to Cheryl. So if they play Cheryl, they can always Cheryl and then Star Portal back. You can do things to avoid that, by trying to play around, if they've used Star Portal, for example, or one thing you can do is if they have used Star Portal, you can get quick shooting out at turn early and hit the benched one, because when they use Cheryl, they have to, remove all damage from all their evolutions and discard all the energy. So if they make the mistake of evolving prematurely on the bench, you can, get that so they can't Cheryl. But, those are very specific scenarios. I think generally that the quick shooting plan, worked a lot for me. And yeah, I almost like never would get Roxanne unless I knew I could handle going down to essentially no hand.
I have a question about the mirror match since we're kind of on the topic already. Greninja. Is Greninja
Mhm.
bait in the mirror match, or is it one of your best tools?
Greninja is 100% bait in the mirror match. Okay, Nate's kind of shaking his head. I think it's usually 100% bait. And I was kind of thinking about this earlier today. I'm like, why did using Greninja feel so bad? And it's essentially if you use it and you don't immediately win the game, you're putting yourself in a really bad spot. A lot of Palkia is maximizing your star portal usage. It's like a very, very strong ability, and you don't want to just use it on Greninja entirely, especially because you're wasting one of the energy, because there's going to be one energy left on Greninja. And if you think about it, it's like you're trading 3 energy cards for 2 prizes, whereas a Palkia, you can trade 2 energy cards for somewhere between 2 and 4 prize cards. So it's like not a very efficient use of your energy. And in the mirror match, if you use it and they're able to make a comeback from it, you're essentially locking yourself into using Melanie for like 1 or 2 turns, which is not great.
And Nate, you
Yeah,
were disagreeing, so I want to see.
I agree with basically everything Noah said. I don't think it's 100% bait. I think that's I do think Greninja's a very valuable attacker. I do think it's not something I think, as Noah was emphasizing earlier, a lot of the mirror comes down to Roxanne. Admittedly, I only played the mirror once in the tournament, which is pretty funny. Noah played against it 8 times. But it was my experience even in that one match that is also the mirror very much in a lot of ways revolves around Roxanne. And if you're Greninjaing, it's often hurting I wouldn't say throwing away your board, but it hurts your board a lot. You're throwing away a lot of energy. Sometimes you have to retreat your Palkia, so you're losing 2 energy off of Palkia when you do it to attack with it. And you're putting yourself just in a kind of a fragile board state, and if you walk into Roxanne off that, you're going to be in really bad shape. That being said, as Noah said, you shouldn't use it unless it instantly wins you the game. There are a non-zero number of situations where it sort of does instantly win you the game. In one of my mirror games, I took out both their Sobble, also Roxanne them in the same turn, and I would count that as essentially instantly winning. They prized he prized Matt if he got really unlucky, but that's a situation where I essentially instantly won the game with it. And I didn't take my 5th and 6th prize with it, but it put me in a very, very strong board position. So it's definitely an option you want to consider. I wouldn't avoid it completely, but I wouldn't factor it into your core game plan. Even if they don't have Manaphy out, you want to make sure you're not opening up you're not kind of making your board brittle to the point where you're going to lose something like Roxanne, or even them just playing normally, and after you burned all your resources.
So in general, it sounds like the idea of, because I've heard this idea come up a lot, or I'll go watch random Twitch streamers occasionally to see people are doing okay, and a lot of the Palkia players want to go 2 prizes with their Palkia, 2 prizes with their Greninja, and 2 prizes with their Palkia in the mirror match. And that's, judging from the looks on your faces for our audio listeners, they are very against that strategy, it sounds like.
Yeah, so when I hear that, what I hear is I don't have a Palkia with energy, and I use Star Portal to use Greninja, and then I immediately get Roxanne after that. So I have no energy in play, and I have a 2-card hand. That doesn't sound very good for me. Especially, so I will say in the mirror match, one thing I think our list is good with, and I think why I was able to win all my mirror matches, or at least tie them, was we don't have any kind of like random cards that will sit on our bench. Because in the mirror match, while we were kind of like saying, don't use Greninja unless it's going to win you the game, it will often win you the game if they don't have Manaphy in play. And like oftentimes you will have a situation where your only out to your next card is like a level ball for Josile, right? And so Manaphy usually should, be on your board. I'm not saying don't play it. But then also you're going to have your Greninja on your board as well, to draw cards. And then you need another Palkia. So that's already 3 bench spots. So in the mirror match, you're only able to ever have 2 Sobbles down. And if you play anything else like Luminion, like Crobat, like Zigzagoon, suddenly you only have 1 Sobble down. And that is also like, a very rough spot to be in. I had several opponents, open, not Sobble, Greninja, Manaphy, or Palkia, and then the game just felt like incredibly easy after that because they had no access to quick shooting because they had to use Shady Dealings and Teleon to get enough cards to actually work, have their deck function. And then if they don't scoop up net Shady Dealings and Teleon as soon as they cross the kind of Roxanne threshold, I was able to just Roxanne them completely out of the game, and there's nothing you can do about that.
I have a purely selfish follow-up question for that, and that is, I'm an Arceus player. The way Arceus plays the matchup is Arceus, Sobble, nothing else on the field. As the Palkia player, how are you beating that? Because I can think of ways, but
I'll let Nick take that. I am personally like 0-10 against Arceus and Teleon and like testing, and my one loss day 2 was to Brian Kim, who made top 4 with Arceus and Teleon. I kicked myself after the match a little bit because I did the Greninja thing. I was like, oh, I think I'm going to Greninja him here. I think he has a dead hand. And then immediately he punished me. And I'm like, well, I can't recover from using Greninja and then getting like Roxanne like 2 turns later. So yeah, but yeah, Nate, I think you played against it more, so I'll let you take that.
So I believe it was the only deck I played against. It was one of the only 2 decks I played against more than once. I played against like 12 different decks over the course of the event. But I played against it, I believe, 4 times and went 3-0-1 against it. I believe my one tie was I got a penalty, completely my fault. I made a really stupid mistake, but would have resulted in a win. So I'll count that as like strategically it was working out. So yeah, I even despite my record, I don't think it's like an amazing matchup for Palkia. I think it's close. And I think if you were to argue that it's like slightly in Arceus and Tillion's favor, I think that'd be very reasonable. I haven't tested it quite enough to like put numbers on it, but in the Arceus and Tillion matchup, the most important thing as Palkia, as far as game plans, is to like just chill out. Like it's a very slow. Arceus and Tillion's a very slow deck. They can't even one-shot your Palkia Vs, so really they have no outs to like make aggressive plays of any kind. So it's going to take them at least usually around 6 turns to win. They're going to need about 6 attacks to win the game. They're going to have to 2-shot 2 Palkia and then kill 2 single prizers, or they'll have to take down 3 Palkias, just 6 attacks. They can probably use bosses orders at various times to know if you try to make it more than 6 attacks, it'll probably be around 6. So that's a fairly long game. So you have time to chill and set up your board. And put yourself in a really strong board position to play around Roxanne, and then also be able to make big combos. So in the matchup, you're going to need to make some big power plays to win. You're going to need to like horn boss something. You're going to need to boss an Arceus on the bench, sometimes with a big charm, and use all your damage modifiers to knock it out. But the most important thing is before you do any of that, you get a lot of energy in play. You set up your board really cleanly. You don't walk into a Roxanne, and then and only then, when your board is really set up and strong, then you can go for those big power plays. And you have time to do that because the Arceus and Tillion is very slow. So usually it is almost impossible to take down an Arceus V-Star in one hit. Even without a big charm, it's very difficult. It is possible if they really overfill their bench, but it's quite hard. So usually the winning line is something along the lines of you chug your way through 1 Arceus V-Star. They miss 1 Charons, which is not that uncommon because you usually only have 1 Sobble in play, so it can actually be kind of hard for them to find the Charons, especially after they've already used 1 or 2. They have to like find Palpad in the same turn, and that can be difficult. So you get your way through 1 Arceus V-Star, and then if they're doing Charon's Loop, they'll usually have an Arceus V on their bench. So you'll cross switcher or boss that Arceus V, use all your damage modifiers to knock it out, and then you'll horn boss another Arceus V, or maybe you'll take down a single prizer, and then you'll horn boss a single prizer. And of course, they can play around that with ordinary rod. They have a lot of answers to your stuff. But I think the most important note in the matchup that might not be intuitive is to just relax at the beginning of the game, set up your board, and then go for the big plays. You don't need to be in this big rush like, oh, I have to find all my combo pieces on turn 2 to knock out an Arceus V on the bench. You don't need to do that. You also should not go Greninja to take out a single prizer and then hit an Arceus. That also, which I believe what Noah did, which just, it's a very reasonable. I mean, it looks really good. Like, oh, I'm setting up an Arceus for 2-shot. I'm taking out their Sobble. But if you put yourself in a bad board state after doing that, you're going to be in trouble. There are some opportunities where Greninja is strong, taking out one Sobble, or oftentimes if they don't put Manaphy down, which also means they're benching an extra thing. If they don't put Manaphy down, you can take out 2 Sobbles. So there are opportunities to use Greninja, but you should only do it if you're like really, really sure it's going to put you in a good spot, because using Greninja, as we've mentioned several times, really hurts your board state, and that's sort of the death sentence in that particular matchup.
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you for helping me learn to beat the deck.
Yeah. So I don't know how to play it from the other side. I'm not a very good Arceus Intellion player, but
honestly, I barely started to learn it. I saw Orion Sutherland tweet out a list they were playing in the late night, and I was like, why is there no Manaphy? Don't you just lose to this? And they responded like, that's not how you play the matchup. And I was like, oh, I need to test this. And so I started testing it. And PTCGO ladder is kind of a meme for testing, but it gave me the chance of like to see it from the Arceus side against Palkias, right? And so now I'm kind of like, well, what does a good Palkia player do? So thank you. Again, purely selfish. All right. Are you both ready to talk a little bit about your runs at NAIC? Cool.
Yep. Okay.
So the very first thing, and it's a question for both of you, and then we'll kind of go into the days and some of the key matchups and stuff like that. But the very first question I always want to ask people, because everyone's so different. So you submitted your deck list at, I don't know, 8 p.m. on Thursday night? If not later?
Probably more like 7 a.m. Friday morning.
I think I got it in at like maybe midnight the night before.
Okay. Yeah. So we're talking about midnight, 7 a.m., ridiculously late. How are you feeling sitting down for round 1? First NAIC in either 3 years, right, for Nate? God, you got the top 4 mat. I know you brought it and you were using it, right? So you got to defend your title. And Noah, your first NAIC in Masters ever, correct?
I played in 2014 and 2015, and I went like 1-3 drop both times.
Perfect.
So,
so first one in 8 years, if my math is right?
7.
Okay, perfect.
7 years, yeah.
7, okay, perfect. So what are you doing? Thinking either this is my first one in 7 years, I have to defend my top 4, and I'm playing a list that I submitted 25 minutes ago. Nate, can we start with you? How are you feeling, and what are you thinking going into round 1? Are you ready to make top cut? Are you thinking, I'm going to fall on my face so hard? Like, where are you at?
Definitely a lot of different things. I definitely wish I had got more sleep. That's pretty consistent across tournaments that I go to. Yeah, could always use more sleep. I often get very nervous before round 1. I think until I get really into the tournament, I'm like feeling the list, I'm feeling the deck. Like I'm going through all the scenarios in which I can lose. Don't do that. Not good for mental is like a really important factor of the game. So definitely not a good thing to be doing before the tournament. And then also for me, it was, I know this sounds silly, but it was really one of the first, if not the first, like ever large event I had played like a true meta deck at. It wasn't the kind of deck that's just like, oh, I'm going to blow you up every turn. And often those kinds of decks that have like Baby Blonde's an example. I played a few others too, but often those decks have some really strong matchups. So sometimes I'll be a little less nervous because if I sit in front of a good matchup, I'm like, oh, I got this. I know it. But Palkia was not one of those decks. Like, I think Palkia does have strong matchups in places, but it's not like it's got auto wins the way Baby Blonde's does. And so I think that also made me nervous because there's more opportunities for misplays. There's more opportunities for things to go wrong. The deck was also just a lot more complicated. There's a lot more going on. So on lack of sleep and also not as tested as I would have liked to be, I was definitely really nervous. So getting over that like round 1-2 like hump of nervousness is definitely really important. But also good to remember like you're only human. Like mistakes will happen. You've tested as well as you can. So trying to shake off as much of those nerves as early as possible is definitely a big part of the game because I misplay more in earlier rounds than I do in later rounds because of that. And thankfully, I sat down. So, not well, sort of thankfully. So my round one, I sat down against Turbo Dark, which I had never tested against, ever. I knew what the deck did. It was like Darkrai V Star, like Galarian Moltres V, plays like 4 Dark Patch, tries to get a really fast start and blow you up very quickly.
Did they have the Weezing or no?
They did not have Weezing, thankfully. I was like, if this person had opened Weezing, I would have lost the game immediately. Like my hand was like, I would have just died to Weezing. So very glad they did not play it. But had never tested it. But sort of shook it off, like went with a normal Palkia game plan, came up like I knew one of Turbo Dark's weaknesses was that they have to bench a lot of random Vs like Crobats and Galarian Moltres. So sort of just went with a normal plan of like boss, horn boss. I think I took down one Darkrai V-Star. I think I got a KO with a Manaphy round one actually, which I think would be an interesting topic to talk about later, like how you come up with those weird situations. But I think once I was over round one, I was feeling a lot better, and continued from there. Played against a lot of different decks days one. I think I played against Mew twice, and that was my only repeat deck in day one. And then I went 7-1-1 in day one, and then unfortunately lack of sleep and some nerves got to me day two. I made a couple errors that got me penalties, made a few misplays. Again, all my fault, not blaming the judges in any way. And I ended up 9-3-3 at 37th, which I was pretty pleased with. First time playing a meta deck at a big event, pretty complicated. Could have used more testing, so I was pleased when I run. It feels really bad to have lost to like silly mistakes. I think that was the thing that was most frustrating for me. But overall pleased. Yeah, overall pleased with the way the tournament went. And then Noah definitely had a much different experience playing only, I believe, 4 different decks the entire event.
Yeah, so I guess like going back to your question, so I opened an absolutely horrible start against the mirror match, and I scooped after about 10 minutes. So that was like not a great
match,
way to
not
start,
just game one, but
no, game one.
Oh,
game
okay.
One. So I scooped game one. I scooped game one very quickly. And so I guess like, and going into the tournament, I'd been testing the deck a lot, and I kind of like Nate said, there weren't a lot of auto wins. But there weren't a lot of auto losses either. And I think, unlike Nate, I come from more of like I would just play whatever was good kind of background. And I knew, for that situation, you need to be confident in your list, have play tested the deck, a bit to kind of like know how to navigate those weird mirror match situations that'll always come up. And then also, just, be like really focused and not make misplays, which is, what I was trying to do. So I will say my day one was like very tense. I played against Mirror, let's see, I played against Mirror 4 times. I played against Flying Pika 3 times. Hold on. Okay, actually. Oh, and then I played against Mew twice. There we go. So those were my 3 decks: Mew, Flying Pika, and Mirror Match. And I managed to go 8-1 with my only loss being Azul on Flying Pika. And I will say, I think that matchup is a lot closer than a lot of people make it seem. My 2 losses, one of them was like I had an incredibly dead hand, which, will inevitably happen. And then the other one was I prized double Drizzile, and I was not able to draw them in time to actually use my shady dealings to like come up with a win. So yeah, so that was my day one. But it was a very, very long day. It was a lot of very close matchups. Some of them, coming down to Roxanne, some of them coming down to me drawing the exact 3 cards I needed off of Melanie. Sorry, Kaiwin, for that. Very, very long and tiring day one. But I think after about rounds 2 to 3, I going into the tournament, I thought, the deck is going to feel incredibly good, or it's going to fall flat on its face. I don't know which one. And after I was like 4-0, I said, okay, I think I have a really good list, and now it's up to me to play it out well.
Wait, it took you until 4-0 to say that? Bro, if I'm 1-0, I'm like, this deck is broken. I'm winning the whole thing.
I don't know. All my wins were like very close. So I think until about like rounds 3 and 4, like, I was going loss, win, 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 loss, win, something like that. So it was very, it was very tense. But yeah, I tried to not let off the gas, until the end of the day.
This wasn't where I was going to go with it, but now I want to after you mentioned that. Is it hard to finish a best of 3 in 50 minutes with this deck?
It can be.
Yeah.
You definitely have to know when to scoop when you're losing. And it's very hard to do that because the deck can make crazy comebacks with Roxanne, with those crazy 4 prize turns, with Echoing Horn, but I think just realizing when you're starting to string up, like, okay, I'll win if I Roxanne, and then I boss, and they whiff energy, and then I'm able to find my quick shooting, and then Echoing Horn, as soon as those thoughts start coming into your mind, you need to say, okay, if they get another attack, I just have to concede. Because I think the deck is, good enough to win a best of 3 in like most situations. Probably not against Mewtwo V Union, but anything else, I think it can handle. So realizing that, and kind of trusting yourself that, like, hey, like, I started pretty suboptimally, they popped off. Just got to shake it off and go next. Yeah, but I think if you play out a really long, game 1 and you lose it, that's not entirely great. You're gonna have to hope that they break one of the 2 games.
And I will also I think I just want to add that I think this is a little bit of like an underrated part of tournaments. I'm sure I'll get made fun of for this because I went 306 at a regional this season, but knowing when to scoop is one of like the hardest skills in the game, and it's not something a lot of people practice or think about. When you test, you're thinking about the matchups that you're playing and the lines that your deck can take. You're not thinking about the time limit. In fact, most people who test don't even test the time limit, and I don't blame you. I mean, who wants to? It's more fun to just play the game normally. But there definitely, and I don't do this enough, but there is value in testing with time, and also just learning when your deck is almost certainly going to lose. And I will even say that 50 minutes is so strict that sometimes, depends on the deck, maybe not Palkia because you do have a lot of opportunities to come back later in the game with Roxanne, but sometimes it's better to scoop a game that you had a 10% chance of winning, um, and and play out the full 3 games in those situations. And sometimes 10% of the time in those situations you will scoop a game that you would have won. And sometimes it's okay to do that because the time limit is really strict, and a lot of it's a very difficult skill, and it's different per deck. And I think it's important for people to think about, and people don't think about it enough, myself included.
Cool. Thank you
Yeah,
both.
I will say I think Palkia is the kind of deck that if you have a playable hand, you can usually string together a win. I think the deck is that strong. So I think most of the times I was scooping was I would draw pass for about 3 turns, maybe boss something to see if they whiffed energies for a few turns. But as soon as they started attacking, I'd just, say, hey, I'm going first next game.
Yeah, I agree with that too. Palkia, I know specifically has just an outrageous comeback potential. It's one of the reasons it's so strong. So yeah, maybe not with Palkia, but
Cool. Thank you both. It's one of those things that always have that question mark in my head because Inteleon decks can be so slow, and Palkia specifically is a very difficult deck to play. Like every decision is ridiculously important because you only have so many resources and you can do so much. So I appreciate the general tips on that one. So now, Nate, you already kind of gave us into your day 2, but I want to talk about that going from day 1 into day 2 because we have 7-1-1 and 8-1. Those are really good records. You're not just skating by at 6-2 and then you ID that last round, which I hate, by the way. But you're 6-2, you ID that last round, you're like, I got to go 5-0-1, to make top cut. You're both doing really well. How are you feeling going into day 2? What are you doing Saturday night? Did you go out and party in Columbus, Ohio? Did you go to bed early? Like, where are we kind of at in there?
definitely no parties. Definitely no parties for me. Fortunately or unfortunately. But I wanted to basically we went out for dinner because we were all starving. Definitely also an underrated part of tournaments is just like physical. Not mental health, but also physical health is very difficult to maintain during an event. It's exhausting, and it's very difficult to find time to eat enough food. I mean, there's a lunch break, but usually no dinner break, and it usually goes well past dinner hour. So we went out for food, and then I basically immediately went to bed. Probably could have gone to bed a little bit earlier. Was chatting about the deck, chatting about our runs a little bit. But basically immediately went to sleep, and then woke up bright and early for the next day. Was again feeling very nervous. I will say, I think again, mental, like your mental status in tournaments is not something a lot of people talk about, and is really important. I again definitely misplay earlier in days in day 1 or day 2 than I do later rounds, and I think I had some pretty bad hands in my first match, but I think probably could have brought it to a tie if it wasn't for a couple misplays that I made in my first round of day 2. So, yeah, very nervous. But it's important, it's important to not to let the 7-1-1 or 8-1 go to your head. Like, it's just it's impossible to realistically do this. But it's the only thing that matters is your next game and the cards sitting in front of you in that next game, and try to get as many wins as possible. Unless you're in a situation to ID, and then you can consider that. But otherwise, it's all about just getting that next win, and nothing else matters. So. Definitely could have been better about that, but yeah, started off the day with a loss, and then continued kind of going up and down. I think I went 2-2-2 in day 2, so had a win, then had a tie, then had a loss, then had a win. So it could have gone better. Definitely could have played a little better, played a less sloppy. Again, got a couple penalties for things I should have done differently, but yeah, could have been worse. But yeah, I think it's a good note for all players is keeping your mental status up over the course of an event is perhaps is almost as important as anything else during a tournament. So
Noah, can you walk us through your day 2 run?
Yeah, I was trying to not think about my record at all. I did not expect to do that well. Of like I mentioned earlier, I dropped my first 2 nationals and masters, and this was my 3rd tournament of the year. So I essentially was just like, hey, I'm gonna play one game at a time. I'm enjoying the deck. I think it's really good. I'm not making a lot of misplays. I'm just gonna focus on the game, not thinking about who I'm playing, what I'm playing against, what the prizes are for anything. I didn't even know really until like after top 8 was done, like exactly how much money there was on the line, or any of that. The only thing I did know was I had to win the event to get my Worlds invite. So I said, okay, just gotta keep winning. And yeah, I think that's very easy to do though when you're 8-1 and you are feeling like, okay, the deck is good, I'm playing well, I just need to keep doing it. I do think it's a lot more tricky if you're coming in, like 6-1 or something. You have to really hone, get yourself in the zone really, and just just concentrate on all your matches. But I don't know. I tried to just not think about it at all, and not think about who I was playing against either, and just play the matches, and use the cards in front of me. So yeah.
And dodge Sander all day long.
Yeah, actually, that was the most stressful thing. Was I kept getting paired in such. I kept getting enough points to play against Sander. Like we would have the exact same points, but I guess the way pairings work is it starts with the person at the highest seed, and then it goes down. And thankfully, the people with the highest seed had always played against other people with the highest seed, so it would inevitably go all the way down to me, and then I would play against them instead of Sander. So I managed to dodge Sander all of day 2, which, yeah, we had been talking about some weird lines that we could maybe use to cheese out a win against him, but it was realistically not a great matchup at all. So yeah, very very happy I did not play him.
And then I unfortunately slammed into one of the Mewtwo V Unions in my final round. And I did try those weird lines. Sadly did not work. Came honestly decently close to almost pulling off one of them, but which maybe we can talk about the Mewtwo V Union matchup, which is not good. Yeah, it's pretty funny that Noah was always like, oh, I'm gonna play against Sander next round, and then always it would be like, oh, just kidding, because these 2 people haven't played against each other yet, they have to play, and therefore I'm not gonna play against Sander. So there's always a little bit of matchup luck, but yeah, that's it was nice not having to play against them too many times.
I'm curious about that.
I will say. Oh, I was just gonna say I'm glad. I'm not glad I lost to Azul, but I do know if I would have beaten him and played against Sander, my first game on stream ever would have been a very embarrassing dumpster fire where Sander just destroys me, and I'm trying to come up with some kind of weird hydro break, quick shooting, triple quick shooting, echoing horn kind of play, and just falling flat on my face. So yeah, that was you do have to get kind of lucky to make top 8. There's no denying that. And yeah, I was you just don't think about it really, and just keep playing. And
you were the reason.
You
were the reason a U.S. player finally won NAIC, because if you had beaten Azul, Sander would have won the event.
Yeah, I think that is the most likely outcome. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm curious about that matchup specifically because every Friday there's a local tournament here where you win store credit. So I'm like, I'm gonna care a little bit because that's free cards every set, right? People love to play their Mewtwo V Union. People love the funny stall deck here. So I'm checking the late night tournament results. I'm checking the online tournament results and the matchups. And for some reason, Palkia takes a very positive matchup to Mewtwo V Union in the online tournaments, which seems like that's a bad online tournaments or a meme type of thing. Is this matchup ever winnable for Palkia, assuming you don't donk them? Like, what do you do?
So the short answer is not really. I have heard there have been like some text people are playing that like made it harder from YouTube V Union. I admittedly don't know what those would be, other than the only thing I can possibly think of is a second echoing horn. But which I'm not sure is correct, although it would probably help a lot. So I think in general, if both decks do what they're intended to do, you're probably not going to win. That being said, in the middle of a tournament, not everyone knows every line and every card in your deck, especially in closed deck lists. So we came up with some ways to potentially beat it if they didn't know what we were trying to do, which is not a super valid way of beating a deck if you're relying on lack of knowledge. But again, in a big event with closed deck lists, it is possible. So the two lines we came up with is I'm helping all the Mewtwo V Union players out here because now they'll know to play around it. But the two lines we came up with is we would take three prizes, and then hopefully they wouldn't have it. Oftentimes they can get a Mewtwo V Union out after that, but if they haven't gotten Mewtwo V Union out, you take three prizes, and you leave yourself in a situation where it looks like you can only use quick shooting once, because they didn't know we played rare candy.
Mm-hmm.
And then they would have, in theory, they would have a Snorlax and a Meowth on the bench. They would have Snorlax active and a Meowth on the bench, and you would go quick shoot, rare candy, quick shooting, scoop up, quick shooting, and then Greninja to take two prizes. And sometimes, in theory, in that situation, you can dunk them because they don't have any other basics in play, or you simply take your fourth and fifth prize, and then you can Echoing Horn for the game. I think from testing it once, that's pretty unrealistic. That just whole situation is pretty unrealistic. I mean, it's theoretically possible, but yeah, pretty unrealistic. And then the other one, which is also unrealistic, is Palkia doesn't. The problem is Palkia doesn't do enough damage. You're never getting through that. You're never especially if they have no bench. You're never getting over that 200 barrier, and they can just heal 200 every turn, unless you use Palkia V's attack, which does 200 damage for 3 water energy. Not something you normally ever use. But with a choice belt, if they don't have Tool Jammer down, again, big if, but if they don't have a Tool Jammer down, you're doing 230 damage. So you can do one of two ways. So you can use Star Portal to Palkia, move it up, use Hydro Break for 230. They heal down to 30. And then you go triple quick shooting. We play 2 Scuba Nets. You go triple quick shooting. And then quad cross switcher. You'd have to horn probably this turn also. You horn something, you go quad cross switcher because Hydro Break says you can't use the Palkia to attack during the next turn to switch it in and out. And then that's 230 plus 60, which is 290, plus the 30 you've already done is exactly enough to take down a Mewtwo V Union. The other slightly better way is you can just charge up a Palkia V slowly, and then you can retreat to one of the things you're going to scoop up net, and then Star Portal that turn to get the energy back onto it, and do the similar play. But it's Belt Hydro Break, triple quick shooting, Belt Hydro Break is the theory. Again, doesn't work if they have Tool Scrap, if they have Tool Jammer down. Fairly unrealistic. But again, we were sort of grasping at straws here to come up with if there's any way of beating it. I lost my first game, and then we didn't finish the second game against it. But if you're playing Palkia and it looks totally unwinnable, those are some lines for you to consider if you can try to pull them off.
That just sounds so bad.
Yeah, I guess you also can just get quick shooting down early and theoretically be hitting for 210 every turn with Palkia V-Star if you have the belt. I do think playing Tool Scrapper and Leon probably helps a little bit. If you're able to get rid of their Tool Jammer, that's kind of plus 30, and then Leon out of nowhere is also another plus 30. So I think, Leon, and maybe if you're playing Leon, you're probably playing Palpad too. So double a Leon into another Leon with Hydro Break and Tool Scrapper and Belt. I think that might be another valid way where you don't have to use like, every single scoop up net and quick shooting in your deck.
Yeah.
Also, they play Cook, which
Yep.
hurts the like leave them with 30 damage idea. That was actually how I actually set up the play, and then I used Cook, and I'm like, all right, it's over. Right? But yeah, playing just a whole bunch of damage mods, I imagine, would help a lot.
Noah, can you walk us through a little bit too about that Flying Pikachu matchup? Because I don't want to have to make you relive top 8, but we didn't get to see the top 8 matchup. Instead, we had to watch a miserable Palkia mirror match. I don't know if either of you have gone to watch the Bradner versus Wada matchup. It's not worth your time. It's like Wada bricks, Bradner bricks, Wada bricks. It was terrible. But I know. I assume we missed a really good top 8 match between you and Azul.
You did. You actually did. My game. Well, you did in the sense that I should have been 0-2. So game 1, I completely bricked. I bossed a Bibarel, and he whiffed a switching out for like 2 or 3 turns. Meanwhile, I was draw passing, and then I cross switched the Bibarel again, and then he whiffed a switching out like 1 or 2 turns, and then he beat me. I would have definitely scooped very early in that match if it was 50 minutes, but we had 75 for top 8. So I was like, I'm just gonna like try to suss out his list a little bit, see if how many boss he's playing, how many Chance Cares he's playing, if he's playing any air balloon stuff like that. But yeah, it was quite unwinnable. And then game 2. So for context, I had beaten Azul already in day 2. And day 1, it was kind of like a brick, and then like he bricks, and then I prize double Drizzile, and I lose a game against him for my game 3. And then in top 8, game 2, I do my first deck search, and lo and behold, 2 Drizzile are prized again. And I'm already thinking to myself, okay, this is a quick 0-2. I'm just going to be out of here in like 10 minutes. Thankfully, though, I was able to come out with a win, which was incredibly surprising. I think Azul himself was like quite surprised. What ended up happening, and this is actually where Greninja shines, in my opinion, is against these kind of like V-Star decks where you can, out of nowhere, take 4 prizes. So what ended up happening was I had already knocked out maybe like a Flying Pika V or an Arceus, and I had hit his Flying Pika for like, I don't know, like 190 or 210 or something. And essentially my out was I had to cross switcher his Flying Pika out of the active because Greninja is not able to hit it after it uses Max Balloon. Echoing Horn a Bidoof, and then quick shooting the Flying Pika to soften it up a little bit more, and then use Greninja to take 4 prizes, which was kind of out of nowhere. I think I had like a 3-card hand. And I was like really hoping he wouldn't Marnie or I guess he couldn't Roxanne, but I was really hoping he couldn't Marnie me there because I looked at my hand like a turn before and I thought, okay, I think I actually have a game if I just attack him here. Because also the rare candy was very helpful there because I think part of that was I had only 1 Drizzile in play and I was able to shady dealings, scoop it up, and then rare candy for more shady dealings.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so that's kind of how I was able to come up with a win there. And then game 3, I look at my prizes. They're double Shady Inteleon, double Drizzile, double Palkia. It did not go very well. But yeah, so okay, going back a little bit into the actual matchup, because I did play against it 5 times. So there are a few ways you can win. The first is you cosplay as a Turbo Palkia deck and you go 2-2-2. You KO a Pika, KO an Arceus V, KO a Pika with Horn. That's not always possible, especially because at least Azul, his list was playing a lot of Marnie, and usually you kind of need to set up a hand to kind of do that. You need to accumulate cards with concealed cards and drawing prizes. So it's kind of hard. The more likely scenario is you go, you KO an Arceus, you KO a Pika, and then you KO a 1-prizer, usually with the help of Greninja somehow. Because then you can theoretically win in about 3 to 4 turns, which is, a lot more feasible. And sometimes also that I think the Pika deck is very susceptible to just like drawing bad hands. Like Azul's list was very consistent, which was really annoying for me. A lot of the other Pikas, I could put them in weird situations where if they only have 1 Pika out and it's the VMAX, you can boss it, hit it with a Palkia, and suddenly they're in a situation where, okay, I can use my Pika to take a 1-shot, but the Palkia that just attacked me already had damage on it from an Arceus, so that's not very efficient. But then if I retreat, I also have to find another Pika. But then if I bench a Pika V, they can just boss and KO it, and then I only have, all my lightning energy are probably in my discard at this point, and I only have one Pika VMAX with damage on it. So you can kind of like, I think like generally the strategy is, KO if they only have one Pika out, you KO that. If they only have one Pika VMAX out, you hit that. If they ever have two Pika VMAX out, you try to go for hitting both with Palkia and then doing Greninja for 6 prizes. I think usually that's what you'll want to do. And then, of course, remembering that Greninja can't hit the Pikachu that just attacked you unless you cross-switcher it out. So all very hard to do under Marnie, which I think is actually why the matchup is so hard. It's not necessarily the Pika, although it does put a lot of pressure on you because it's going to one-shot stuff every turn. The hard part is you're getting Marnied every turn. So you might just draw 5 dead cards and, you can't do anything from there.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that was underrated about Azul's list is 4 Marnies plus a Roxanne is a lot of hand disruption into a field of Inteleon decks. That's like a viable win condition. It doesn't sound like it should be a viable win condition, but it really kind of is.
Yeah, and also the fact that, the barrel makes him very immune to Roxanne. You can't really go for those late game, I hope you break off a Roxanne plays because he can just, drop his hand down, essentially draw 5, and then, use another supporter that turn probably. So yeah, very, very tough. But I do think it's, probably about, 50-50 or 45-55 if, you know how to navigate the matchup.
We also got a question from a viewer that I want to get to. This is from @HailMimi on Twitter. And they ask, how do you navigate counters and weaknesses when Palkia is a target? So we kind of talked a little bit about how there's not like a lot of lightning stuff out there, but let's say your opponent is dropping some lightning stuff or anything else that you consider, a counter, because you know the deck better than I do. You know what you're afraid of. How do you navigate those matchups or those situations with this deck?
Yeah, I guess I could probably specifically talk about like Pikachu and probably the mirror match, and then maybe Nate, you can talk about the random stuff that you played against too. That was inevitably trying to beat Palkia, I'm sure. But at least for me, the weaknesses I see for Palkia are, people just using lightning type attackers first, and then hand disruption, which I think the hand disruption people aren't thinking about, but you're gonna fall victim to anyway, because someone's going to see a Roxanne in their hand and be like, oh, you took 3 prizes. I'm going to Roxanne because, it's the right thing to do without realizing that, that's probably a core strategy in like beating Palkia. So I think to counter that, of course, what you want to do is, if you're worried about Roxanne or like hand disruption, making sure that, I think Nate talked about this earlier, but you establish your board state and you don't kind of rush into the game too quickly, right? You don't have to take, win the game in 3 turns with Palkia. Palkia is a very beefy attacker. Unless they're playing lightning, most things cannot one-shot it in a single attack, especially if you have Tool Jammer down. So you do have a few turns to kind of establish yourself, maybe find a quick shooting, get all your energies in play, maybe without using Star Portal. That's actually the ideal scenario. And then, getting ready for maybe an explosive turn or two where you go for like 4 prizes. So that's kind of like, how I think you should handle that. Also, yeah, just like remembering you're playing a very strong deck. And a lot of times, you'll be able to just kind of power through these matchups with the help of, if you go behind, you can Roxanne to get back into the game. Or, you are playing a fast deck. So there's always the option of winning with like boss.
Cool. And then, Nate, did you hit any other situations where you were like, oh, I've got to play around these shenanigans that I was not expecting or you were expecting and hoping not to hit? Or I don't know how to describe them, but what else?
I didn't play any against kind of like, I wouldn't call them like core Palkia counters. It wasn't like, oh, this lightning type attacker that one shots my Palkia, of which there are like very few in the game right now. I mean, it's like flying Pikachu, and then like Raikou, who also just gets one shot in return.
Don't forget Choice Belt Blitzel.
There's
or Zebstrika. I don't even know. There we go.
Well, I don't even know what that does.
Well, one made day 2, and that's the only reason it was Urshifu Zebstrika.
I know where there's some Vika Volts that made day 2 too.
Ooh, that too. Yeah.
I thankfully didn't have to play against that. That would also be kind of scary. Although that also doesn't one shot you. It's more just that deck is more about like very early item lock. Mm-hmm. I think. But yeah, so I didn't play against weakness specifically, but I played against some things that I'm like, oh, this could be a problem. Ice Rider, I played against twice. For example, Ice Rider one shots a Palkia, and we play Tool Jammer, so in theory you can stop it with Tool Jammer, but they also play Tool Scrapper. So if they have the resources to do it, that they can one shot a Palkia. And I think, and then I also played against a single strike Gengar who could one shot Palkias that I also was a little bit spooked about, although I realized the matchup was probably quite favorable because they have to damage themselves every time they use single strike roar. But yeah, I think in both of those matchups, I think it's important to do what you should do in any matchup that you're not familiar with, because I had never tested against either of these, and just use kind of the core strategies of Pokemon to navigate the game. Prize mapping is just really important. Like, how am I going to take 6 prizes against this deck I've never seen before? I know Palkia against VMAX decks a lot of the time. 3-2-1 is a very solid game plan. You can Greninja a single prizer and a VMAX. You can knock out the VMAX, and then you can Horn Boss or even just Boss a V and take that as a very clean win. So I knew that as a core line that I could go for. And then also just knowing generally, also being able to identify situations mid game of what situations where you can take big advantageous plays. Against one of the Ice Riders, I knocked out both their Sobbles, and I'm like, there's absolutely no way they're going to have like Melanie Choice Belt Tool Scrapper this turn. So identifying situations like that is important. So yeah, I mean, I will go along those same lines. I knew the 3-2-1 line, but it's important not to tunnel vision and be like, this is my win condition, I have to go for this. You need to look at the individual game. Every game of Pokemon is going to look different, and go for the line that's going to help you most in that situation, not being like, this is my only way to win. So yeah, mapping out your prizes early, considering what the threats are, and then looking for advantageous positions as you would in any other game. You can also sometimes find similarities to other matchups. Be like, well, I navigate this matchup in this way, and so this is kind of similar to that, and I can do this. That was what I did with the VMAX decks. I learned that from playing against Muse. And then I will say, as a final note, I think what was I gonna say? I think as a final note, when you play against something you're not very familiar with, it's a best of 3. Like, take some time, make sure you're looking through their discard pile, understand what they're trying to do, get a good sense of what their deck is trying to do, and hopefully that will help you if you lose game 1, figure out, or if you win a close game 1, figure out what you're going to try and do for game 2. I think that's a big thing that a lot of people don't do. Like, before the game ends, like, if you think they're going to scoop or you think you're about to win, take a look at their discard ladder. Make sure there's no crazy text that you didn't think about. Make sure you understand what their win conditions are, what your lose conditions are, so you can go into the next match prepared.
That's some really good advice there, and just playing Pokemon well.
Yeah.
I have another question, my last question. But if you were going into Worlds, would you be considering this exact 60?
I think as of now, the like Mewtwo V Union matchup is sketchy enough that I would probably want to change a few cards. If I were to go back and do NAIC again, I think I would definitely run the exact 60. Tool Jammer is like the only card that you could maybe make a argument for cutting, I think, at least like with the way we were playing the deck. But I'm not sure what else I would play. Maybe like a Leon, Tool Scrapper, another Training Court. I don't know. But yeah, so NAIC, I definitely play this again. I think, though, with the Mewtwo V Union, I'm not sure how popular it'll be. I do worry about that matchup. Although, honestly, like, I could see a lot of people just saying, hey, like, Arceus, Pikachu, Crobat just kind of counters that deck naturally. So people are going to be playing that. And then that'll probably, hurt the Mewtwo V Union meta share. Also, there are a lot of like crazy cards coming out in the Pokemon Go set. I know like Radiant Charizard by itself could be like a very good deck. I saw I think Tord was streaming today with literally his only attacker was the single Radiant Charizard in the entire deck.
There was a Birdkeeper Rowlet in there.
Oh yeah. But I think if I actually were going to Worlds, though, I'm like pretty busy with like life and with work now, so I would most likely just like probably play like 58 of these 60 cards just because I know the deck well and I think it's very strong, regardless of like what the meta shakes out to be. So yeah, probably something like this.
Right on. It's always good to know. So after someone does well with a deck of like, all right, heading forward, did you still run it? So it's good to hear you on that one.
I agree. Tool Jammer is probably the worst card in the deck. I mean, it won me a match against Blissey, and it was definitely helped me, like really helpful against Blissey, obviously, and it was helpful in other cases. But it wasn't sort of a core useful card, like necessary for the strategy of the deck. I think it's just helpful in a variety of matchups. Really helpful against Reggie, is really helpful against Blissey, but it's hard to say how popular those will be. So it sort of depends on the meta going into Worlds.
Cool. Are there any other thoughts on Palkia that you're like, oh, maybe as you were talking, you're like, oh, I should have said this at this other part, or anything like that, or anything on your runs that you want to leave people with before we sign off?
Um, I think one thing we didn't touch on was like random texts that other people are playing. There was a lot of Crobat, Zigzagoon, Luminion, and other people's decks, and you'll notice like a distinct absence of any of those from ours. And I think the primary reason why is, well, two reasons. First is you don't want to start any of these Pokemon, especially in the mirror match. Whenever I saw a mirror match have to use Luminion or start Luminion, I knew I was probably winning the game as long as I had a workable hand. Because with the requirement of having Greninja and a Manaphy, and if they have Luminion down and another Palkia, they only have room for one more Sobble, which is very difficult to work around because you can't really use quick shooting ever. And then just starting these in general is like not that great, which is why I think like most of the Japanese lists are cutting them. I think some might be playing like a 1-star me, if that, because it's a decent starter. You can just free retreat it, but yeah, that's primarily why we're not playing it. And also the bench space can be a little limiting in a mirror match.
Makes sense. Nate, anything else?
I guess I think there's one matchup we didn't talk about a bunch, which I'm sure people will play against a lot. We talked about the mirror, we talked about Arceus and Tillion. I imagine like the third most popular deck right now is Mew. Um, I don't know if there's too much complexity. Sometimes the matchup just comes down to Roxanne Path, but I think one interesting note that people might not think about is, again, in a VMAX matchup, a lot of the time 3-2-1 is a very solid line. You hit a single prizer and a VMAX with Greninja, and then you knock out the VMAX with the Palkia, and then you knock out a 2-prizer with the Palkia, and you can win the game in theory in 3 turns. So you can do that against Mew. The problem is Oricorio you only do 70 damage to one of their single prize attackers, and so that will put you behind by a turn. But Oricorio is weak to water, not something that is normally important. But if you're playing Palkia, notice the opportunities. If you can, sometimes on your Greninja turn, you can cross-switcher or boss the Oricorio, and then you can knock out the Oricorio and then put the other 90, or it'll be 70 on a VV max to go for that 3-2-1 play. So something that might not be necessarily intuitive. And then I think just generally a thought that I wanted to talk about at the beginning, which I maybe didn't, is just why Palkia is so strong against. I'm someone who doesn't typically play metagame decks, but one of the reasons I landed on Palkia is just kind of how strong it is at each stage of the game. I think the card is generally strong. It's 280 HP attacker, very difficult to one-shot, does a lot of damage. The way to prevent it from doing damage is limiting your bench, which is often nerfing yourself and making your deck weaker. And perhaps most importantly, because of all of those factors, you have just an outrageous ability to come back in the game. I mean, oftentimes those games you're like, oh, I had a bad start, like I'm gonna have to do a whole bunch of shenanigans to come back. You win those games, like if you're a really good player, maybe 20. I'm using a very rough number, like 20% of the time, we'll say. Palkia, it felt like you won those games like 50% of the time. Like it has an unbelievable ability to come back because of that high health number, because of that damage output, because of Roxanne, because you have so much control of your deck as Ventilion. And I think that's really where Palkia's strengths lie, and the fact that there's not a lot of counters to it in the format. So even though everyone's thinking about Palkia, everyone knows it's a really strong deck. I expect it to continue to be really strong going forward. Palkia would not be a deck I'd shy away from because everyone knows about it. It's going to get countered. I think it's going to continue to be at the top, if not number one, in the future metagame unless something drastic changes.
Cool. I don't disagree, unfortunately, as someone who's tried to counter Palkia. It's easier said than done. Noah, if people want to find you, where can they find you at?
Yeah, I'm on Twitter. I just started. It's Yoshi_TCG. Yeah, please follow me. I probably am not going to post much except for when I play in tournaments. But yeah, which is probably not as often as other players. Definitely going to try to, probably make a push for my Worlds invite next year. Go to like 5 or 6 regionals. Go to at least EUIC and NAIC. I'm hoping for the stipend to LAIC as well. But yeah, don't know how that's going to shake out.
Oh, that should be like really safe for you.
I don't know. I've talked to different people and some say, oh, very safe. Others are like, don't count on it. So yeah, we'll see. I'll take what I can get.
I'll be rooting for you. I don't actually know enough to say anything, but I feel like with only 2 events, it's you're in a good place. Nate, where can the people find you if they want more of you?
Yeah, you can follow me on Twitter at BlahTCG, no underscores, BLAHTCG. Talk about Pokemon, talk a little bit about game design. I share deck lists and when I'm going to events. So I've been trying to grow my Twitter. So if you want to hit me up on a social, that's definitely the place to be.
Both those Twitters will be linked below in either the description box on YouTube. Remember to like, comment, subscribe, or in the notes on whatever podcast app you are currently using. Myself, Twitch, Twitter, and YouTube at Mellow_Magikarp. This has been another episode of the Lake of Rage podcast. We'll catch you all next week.